Great to have you back. One simple question: how did the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Northern Arapaho turn terrain into a strategic weapon? We begin with the key dates. The Northern Plains in 1864 are wide with grass and broken ridges. Powder River country sits between Platte River headwaters and the high breaks of Bighorn River. Along this ground runs a new road to the Montana goldfields that travelers call the Bozeman Trail. Its ruts cut through wintering valleys and game corridors that Lakota and their Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho allies depend on. Date and place are fixed: 1864 to 1868, Powder River Basin of present-day Wyoming and Montana territories. Fort Reno on Powder River, Fort Kearny near the Piney Forks, Fort C. F. Smith on Bighorn River. These posts stand as islands along the road. Between them move wagon trains, small patrols, and scouting parties. Inside the basin move village circles that follow grasswater and bison. The principal actors are clear: Lakota alliance centers on Oglala and Minneconjou, leaders with Red Cloud as principal war leader, and field captains such as Crazy Horse for decoy and strike work. United States forces shift from summer columns under Patrick Connor to fixed garrisons under Henry Carrington, with wood trains, herd guards, and infantry escorts. This ground matters because it concentrates food, pasture, and mobility. Whoever sets terms of movement here controls the main corridor between Platte River country and the northern goldfields. The forts promise safety to travelers but cannot see beyond the next ridge. The alliance knows every coulee and timber tongue. The central question is direct: why did Lakota and their allies dominate the Powder River Basin across the 1860s, even as the United States built forts on the trail and marched columns into the basin? And what features of strategy, alliance logistics, and terrain made that outcome likely? Gold in Montana territory creates the road. In 1863 and 1864, prospectors push a cutoff from Platte River country to the upper Yellowstone. Travelers call it the Bozeman Trail. The line runs through the Powder River Basin where Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Northern Arapaho hunt bison and winter along timbered streams. Traffic increases month by month. Each wagon train needs grass, water, and wood. Each camp pressures game and fowls crossings. Friction grows. The legal frame predates the road. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 recognizes Lakota hunting ranges across the Powder and the Tongue. It promises annuities in exchange for safe passage on established roads. The Bozeman Trail is not an established road at the time of signing. By the mid-1860s, United States officers argue that military necessity and mineral rushes justify a new corridor. Lakota leaders argue that any new road requires consent and negotiation. The positions collide in council. Policy shifts in Washington shape the frontier. During the Civil War, the War Department takes the lead on plains security. After Appomattox responsibilities blur with the Department of the Interior and its Indian Office. Posts are closed in the South and reorganized in the Trans-Missouri. New lines of communication appear. The Union Pacific crosses southern Wyoming by 1867. Railheads shorten the approach to the Powder River country and swell traffic toward Montana. Each mile of rail delivers more people to the roadhead and increases pressure on the basin's forage and game. Resource stress is uneven. Northern bison herds remain strong in the early 1860s, but constant passage near the best grass and water shifts animals and reduces hunting success near the road. Timber near the new forts thins fast. Hay meadows close to posts are cut over each summer. Winter brings hard choices. Villages must balance proximity to fuel and shelter with the need to avoid patrols and sudden seizure of horse herds. Garrisons must haul grain, salt, and ammunition across long distances and protect herds against dawn raids. The prelude timeline is clear. Spring 1864 brings sustained traffic on the Bozeman Trail. Summer 1864 sees small escorts and occasional clashes. In early 1865, Washington orders a converging campaign under Brigadier General Patrick Connor. The Powder River expedition marches in late summer. Columns burn lodges and stores along tributaries, but fail to force a decisive engagement. Winter 1865 to 1866 leaves bitter memory on both sides and no settled corridor. Spring 1866 attempts a political reset. A council at Fort Laramie opens with talk of a road agreement. Red Cloud and other leaders attend. While talks proceed, Colonel Henry Carrington arrives with orders to build a chain of forts on the road. Seeing troops moving to fix posts before consent, Red Cloud walks out. For Lakota leaders, this is the breach. For Army planners, the posts are a prerequisite for any road use. Construction begins. Fort Reno on Powder River is reinforced. Fort Kearny rises near the Piney Forks. Fort C. F. Smith is sited on Bighorn River. Immediate triggers multiply through 1866. Escorts and wood trains exchange fire with scouting parties. Arrests of suspected raiders near posts are attempted and resisted. Seizures of pony bands by patrols spark retaliatory drives on mule herds. By late autumn, routine woodcutting becomes a tactical event. On 21 December, a decoy party near Lodge Trail Ridge draws out Captain William Fetterman's detachment. The destruction of that party hardens positions and sets the tone for the next 2 years. Objectives diverge and harden. Lakota and their allies aim to keep the Powder River Basin free of permanent United States corridors. The practical goal is to make the road unusable and force abandonment of the posts. The method is to control contact, decoy to ambush near broken ridges, strike at herds and trains, avoid the stockade walls, preserve village safety and mobility. Constraints are seasonal. Winter exposes families and limits campaigning distance. Ammunition resupply depends on trade and capture. Horse herds require steady grass and protection from theft. United States objectives are linear: secure a reliable corridor from Platte River country to the Montana diggings, protect civilian trains, demonstrate federal reach after the war. The chosen method is fixed posts with daily patrols and work details. Constraints are structural. Infantry-heavy garrisons lack mounted reach. Reinforcements move slowly. Each fort consumes wood and hay at a high rate. Each patrol must guard its own lifeline. A 500-man column requires several tons of food and forage each week and stretches out across miles of road. Every creek crossing delays movement and exposes flanks. Administrative reality complicates operations. Field commanders answer to departmental headquarters that juggle economy measures, demobilization politics, and public demands for safe passage. Interior agents press for treaty solutions while settlers and shippers demand escorts now. Rules on arrests, disarmament, and reprisals change with each circular. Ambiguity at the top translates into mixed signals at the posts and in council lodges. By mid-1867, both sides adapt. Garrisons harden work parties behind wagon box lagers and hay corrals. Lakota and Northern Cheyenne concentrate larger strikes but pull back sooner against breech-loading fire. The strategic pressure remains on the road. Civilian companies count losses and delay traffic. Winter, 1867 to spring 1868, brings renewed army pushes and renewed village dispersal. The ledger of cost and gain sets the stage for treaty talks that will decide the status of the forts and the road. Late summer, 1865. Tongue River breaks through cottonwood and willow on the north side of the basin. Northern Arapaho lodges stand near good water. Northern Cheyenne visitors camp on higher ground. The season is dry and hot. Dust hangs over crossings. Brigadier General Patrick Connor rides with a prong of his expedition. Scouts point out lodge smoke. Couriers race to rear echelons to pull the pack train close. The attack falls at first light on 29 August. Soldiers burn teepees and cut loose horse herds. Women and children flee into brush draws. Warrior societies counter with screens that slow pursuit. Connor issues orders by handwritten slips. Runners carry them between scattered companies. His line holds the ground, but cannot fix the villages. The immediate effect is displacement. The Arapaho lose their shelters and food stores. The Alliance notes the method. The United States will strike villages when it can find them. The lesson returns across the winter in council fires and in vows to protect horse herds. Autumn 1865. Settles cold over Powder River country. Snow comes early on the ridges. Trails harden at night and thaw at noon. The expedition withdraws to its posts. The road does not close. Small trains keep moving. Guides mark fresh bypasses around bad crossings. Lakota and Northern Cheyenne hunters see new ruts beside old ones. They watch for advance riders and dust plumes. Messages travel by mounted couriers from creek to creek. A village can know of a train by sundown and send a strike group before dawn. Telegraph does not reach this basin. Every warning moves by horse and memory. Pressure builds without a decisive clash. The army can burn a camp. The Alliance can empty the road for days at a time. Spring 1866. Fort Laramie sits on the Platte in light wind and bright sun. Negotiators call a council to talk about road use and peace. Red Cloud and other leaders arrive with large followings. They expect discussion first. Colonel Henry Carrington arrives with construction orders and with troops. His carpenters begin work on timbers and stockpiles for new forts. Word of the movement reaches the council ground. Red Cloud walks out. The break is immediate and public. Interpreters relay positions slowly and with care, yet the facts are visible. Soldiers are already on the trail with axes and draft teams. For Lakota leaders, this is the breach of process. For the Army, this is the timetable. The outcome is construction without consent. The The immediate effect is mobilization. Warrior societies call young men to ride. The Bozeman Trail becomes a line of daily contact. Early summer 1866. Fort Reno is reinforced. Fort Phil Kearny rises on a bench above the Piney Forks. Fort C.F. Smith is surveyed on the Bighorn. The wind is steady from the west. Timber stands are close but not within the walls. Wood trains begin each morning. Each train moves slow with oxen and mule teams. Escorts march on foot with fixed intervals. Decoy riders appear at long range. They cross and recross the line of march. They bait pursuit. Carrington issues tight orders. No detachment will cross Lodge Trail Ridge without support. Couriers carry the order on paper slates. The ridge itself is a hard line in local talk. The ground beyond it breaks into blind draws and low folds. Scouts warn that sight lines end there. The fort's flag is still visible on the crest, yet the earth hides what lies downslope. Mid-July. Skirmishes ring the post. A wood train halts while axemen form a hasty corral of logs and boxes. Shots come from sage cover at 200 yards. The escort fires volleys and then rests to reload. Warriors close and then wheel away. They want movement. They do not want a frontal fight against steady volleys. By afternoon, the wind shifts and carries smoke. The train inches back toward the post. No telegraph calls a relief column. A drummer beats the long roll on the parade ground. Infantry forms. The relief is small and late. The immediate effect is habit. Every day's work is now a tactical problem. Timber and hay are not supplies. They are missions. Late autumn, 1866. Snow squalls sweep the ridgelines. Tracks fill in minutes. The garrison's horses are thin. Forage is tight. Herd guards shiver at dawn pickets. The Alliance studies routines. They learn the names of officers who ride fast. They mark the time it takes to form a relief. They stage mounts behind the crest. Crazy Horse joins a decoy party. The task is simple in design and hard in execution. Ride close, be seen, fire a little, insult a little, draw the hothead over the ridgeline and into the folds where the strike group waits. Timing is everything. If the pursuit is slow, the trap is sprung too early. If the pursuit is quick, the trap closes tight. 21 December, 1866. Morning is clear and brittle. Snow squeaks under boots. A wood detail is out. Signals pass from picket to sally gate. Captain William Fetterman receives orders to support the detail and to bring his men back. The ridge is white and hard under a pale sun. Decoy riders show themselves on the benches. They fall back with easy pace. Fetterman follows. Couriers gallop with last warnings. The detachment crosses the crest and breaks visual contact with the post. On the far side draws fill with mounted men. The trap closes. Henry Carrington writes an instruction that morning. It survives in multiple transcriptions. The phrasing is consistent. Carrington orders, Fort Phil Kearny, 1 December 1860, you will relieve the wood train and return to the post. Do not pursue over Lodge Trail Ridge. Maintain cohesion and avoid the broken ground beyond the crest. The fight develops out of sight of the fort. Drums sound. A relief column forms. Snow and distance slow the advance. The shooting ends before help arrives. Couriers ride back with the first reports. The immediate effect is shock in the fort and resolve in the Alliance. The ridge becomes a lesson in every council and a point of caution in every garrison order. Winter closes fast after the battle. Herd guards double the pickets. Villages shift to deeper shelter along the tongue. Dawn raids focus on mule strings and horse parks. An escort loses a line of mules in a 10-minute rush in half light. Without animals, a column cannot move or carry wood. The road's logic falters. Every recovery demands another escort. The garrison posts standing parties at the ice cut where teams water. They stack hay inside the walls. Each measure increases labor and shortens patrol range. The Alliance wants that pressure. It pushes all winter. Spring 1867. The posts harden their drills. Work details move inside circular lagers. Wagon boxes are chained together. A guard commander rehearses fire control with breech loaders. Scouts report larger concentrations of mounted men on high ground. Signals wave from the ridges with blankets and mirrors. Interpreters in the fort translate snatches of shouted Lakota and Cheyenne taunts carried by the wind. Telegraph is still absent. Every message rides a horse. Every delay costs lives. The incidents stack into a trend. The road functions only under arms. The forts consume men to guard wood and hay. Civilian captains ask for stronger escorts or decline to move at all. By midsummer, pressure peaks in 2 corridors. Hay meadows near Fort C.F. Smith turn into contested ground. Pine slopes near Fort Phil Kearny remain the daily hazard. The season is hot and dry. Sparks from rifle fire set small grass burns that smoke the field and blind aim. The Alliance accepts losses at the edge of lagers to test discipline and fire control. The garrisons accept fatigue and risk to keep fuel and forage coming in. Each day without a convoy is a day the post shrinks its reach. Each day with a convoy is a day that invites a fight. The basin tightens around both sides. The incidents do not resolve into a decisive victory. They do something more important. They make the corridor a ledger of costs that grows heavier each week. That ledger will shape the negotiations to come. Snow still clung to Lodge Trail Ridge in late December 1866. Fort Kearny stood under steady wind. The garrison mixed 2 companies of infantry with detachments of the 18th Infantry and 2nd Cavalry. Civilian woodcutters raised daily dust on the pine benches. The Lakota Alliance concentrated Oglala and Miniconjou circles with Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho allies. Red Cloud oversaw councils. Crazy Horse organized decoy and strike parties. Each side fixed its order of battle to the ground. The United States relied on a fort chain and escorts with muzzle-loading rifles and a few breech loaders. The Alliance relied on mounted screens, scouts, and mass at chosen points. The march that mattered was short in distance and decisive in effect. On 21 December, a wood train moved out along the North Road. The route left the stockade, crossed open benches, and climbed to Lodge Trail Ridge. The crest hid broken coulees that fell away toward Pinot Creek. That blind ground was the choke point. Captain William Fetterman was ordered to cover the train and return. He took 81 men. Decoys appeared on the benches and fell back toward the crest. Couriers struggled on wind-slick snow. The detachment crossed the skyline and lost line of sight with the fort. Rules of engagement were clear on paper. Colonel Henry Carrington had repeated them aloud. Do not pursue beyond Lodge Trail Ridge. Maintain cohesion. Avoid the broken ground. The order was signed at Fort Kearny on the morning of the march. The scope included all wood road escorts. The Alliance set its own rule. Draw the enemy across the crest. Close the side draws. Keep mounted men hidden until the pursuit commits. The first contact was a trickle of fire from riders who baited reaction. Maneuver followed a simple script. The decoys drew the column into converging ravines. Masked riders closed from the flanks and rear. The detachment fought in several knots and went down. Casualties for the United States were total. All 81 men were killed. Alliance losses are contested. Some Army reports claimed 100 or more. Later syntheses suggest a few dozen at most. Sources differ and assign numbers with caution. An after-action line from the garrison record captures the gap between orders and outcome. Relieve the wood train and return. Do not cross the ridge. Henry Carrington, Fort Kearny, 21 December 1866. A short oral line survives in soldier testimony and frontier press. Its attribution to William Fetterman is debated. Give me 80 men and I will ride through the Sioux Nation, reported in the Army and Navy Journal in 1867. Marked here as folklore or at best contested memory. Non-combatants felt the result within hours. Civilians inside the fort heard the distant fire and saw smoke and then silence. Woodcutters were pulled in. Families waiting for escorts learned that none would go out. In Alliance camps, the victory was marked in council, with vows to keep pressure on the road and to avoid costly assaults on walls. The humanitarian outcome for the dead was stark. The field froze. Recovery parties waited until the following day. Burial details worked within sight of ravens and distant pickets. Logistics began to drive every choice. The fort needed wood for heat and construction. The winter had cut hay close to the walls. Herd guards stood dawn and dusk watches with numb hands. Escorts doubled and moved slower. Each escort consumed ammunition and animal strength for a day of protection to bring in a few loads. The Alliance measured that exchange and found it favorable. Dawn raids targeted mule strings and horse parks. A 10-minute rush could carry off dozens of animals. A column without teams could not move. A fort without fuel could not endure the cold. Through spring and summer, 1867, the confrontation took a new shape. The garrisons adopted circular lagers for work parties. Wagon boxes were chained in ovals. Guards drilled fire control with breech loaders. Fort C.F. Smith saw hay-cutting parties work behind log and bale corrals. The Alliance massed larger assaults to test these positions. On 2 August at Fort Kearny, woodcutters were out with a small guard. Captain James Powell commanded the perimeter of wagon boxes. The air was hot and dry. Smoke hung in light wind. Mounted men closed to short range again and again. The guards held fire until targets filled the near ground. The breech loaders cycled quickly. Estimates of attackers vary, but were in the many hundreds. United States casualties were low for the defenders and higher among the attackers, though precise numbers remain disputed in the sources. The same day near Fort C.F. Smith, a hay party fought from an improvised corral on open ground. The defense held. The immediate effect of both fights was to prove that tight perimeters with fast fire could survive massed rushes at close range. The strategic effect was modest. The corridor outside those perimeters remained hostile. Traffic declined further. The forts still could not project control beyond their sight lines. The policy track moved in parallel. The Department of the Interior urged renewed negotiations. The Department of War demanded that the trail be opened or abandoned on clear terms. Departmental orders shifted as demobilization cut manpower. Economy measures reduced mounted strength. Agency rules at Platte agencies tried to regulate trade in ammunition and to steer bands toward rations. Those measures had limited reach in the Powder River Basin. By late 1867, departmental commanders authorized winter strikes to break village capacity. Scout-led columns pushed up Tongue River and into the Powder during hard weather. Some lodges were burned, families dispersed ahead of contact. Columns faced storms, dead horses, and long withdrawal. The alliance absorbed losses in household goods and rebuilt in spring with buffalo and trade. Humanitarian outcomes remained mixed. Civilians along the trail faced episodic danger. Many trains turned back or chose other routes. Non-combatants in alliance camps endured winter stress after raids that burned stores. United States families at posts endured disease, cold, and fear of isolation if escorts failed. The theater had few hospitals. Surgeons noted frostbite and malnutrition after long details. Interpreters carried warnings and messages between camps and forts. Delays between orders and effects were constant. There was no telegraph line to close the gap. Two more short statements show how officers and leaders read the reality. Concentrate the force on essential work. Move in lager. Hold fire until close. Captain James Powell, Fort Phil Kearny District, 2 August 1867. The road is a wound through our hunting grounds. Close the road and we will have peace. Reported from a Lakota council near Tongue River. Date uncertain. Treated as a paraphrase of Allied position rather than a verbatim quote. By winter 1867 to spring 1868, the ledger weighed on planners. Departments counted escorts losses and freight left idle at roadheads. Civilian companies refused contracts without large guards and high rates. Posts consumed men to gather wood and hay. Mounted strength ebbed as forage failed. The alliance sat closer to food and fuel on rivers and in timber. Their logistics were embedded in the basin. The United States logistics were stretched across hundreds of miles. Each skirmish mattered less than that structure. Negotiations opened at Fort Laramie in spring 1868. The legal path fixed what the field had already taught. The docket affirmed unceded Indian Territory status for the Powder River country. The enforcement sequence was simple. Abandon the Bozeman Trail chain, torch the storehouses, pull the garrisons out. The on-the-ground effect was immediate. Fort Reno, Fort Phil Kearny, and Fort C.F. Smith were emptied and then left to weather. Alliance camps entered the empty posts and salvaged timbers and iron. The road ceased to function as a through corridor. Fact and folklore disputes remain. Whether William Fetterman defied explicit orders is supported by garrison papers, yet complicated by contested witness accounts. The boast about riding through the Sioux Nation appears in press and memoir, but remains unproven as a verbatim line. Counts of alliance casualties at Lodge Trail Ridge vary widely between Army claims and later tribal and historian estimates. At the Wagon Box fight, the mix of weapon types among defenders is debated. Some accounts stress Springfield Allen conversions. Others note Henry rifles among civilians. The tactical record is consistent on one point. Close-range disciplined fire from a compact perimeter could blunt repeated rushes. That did not reverse the strategic balance. The confrontation's logic never changed. The alliance controlled when and where to fight. The United States tried to hold a line that exposed every working party and every mile of trail to attack. The decisive events were not only battles, they were the daily choices forced by logistics. A fort needed wood and hay every day. An alliance village needed bison and shelter within the basin. One side reached across distance for every necessity. The other lived on the ground it defended. The treaty confirmed that asymmetry for a time. The turning point came not as a single charge, but as a sequence that forced a legal admission on paper. Who and where Red Cloud's Lakota alliance with Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho holding the Powder River Basin. United States garrisons at Fort Reno on Powder River, Fort Phil Kearny on the Piney Forks, and Fort C.F. Smith on Bighorn River. When winter 1867 to spring 1868, with the decisive decision taken at Fort Laramie in April and May. Objectives and constraints were blunt. The Alliance objective was to make the Bozeman corridor unusable until the forts were removed. Constraints were seasonal exposure of families' finite powder and lead, and the need to protect horse herds against dawn theft. United States objectives were to guarantee a through road from Platte River country to the Montana goldfields and to demonstrate post-war federal reach. Constraints piled up: infantry-heavy garrisons without enough cavalry, no telegraph threading the corridor, ammunition and ration columns stretched for hundreds of miles, hay and wood consumed faster than escorts could safely fetch them, and winter storms that froze teams and halted relief. Orders remained clear even as strain rose. Garrisons tightened rules for work parties, drilled lager procedures, and rationed ammunition to keep a reserve for relief sorties. Agency circulars tried to limit ammunition trade at Platte agencies. Departmental orders authorized winter strikes in hopes of breaking village capacity. Yet every tactical fix deepened the strategic bind. Each stronger escort meant fewer men for patrols. Each winter pushed burned horses and hauled little decisive gain out of the basin's broken ground. The immediate effect of this stalemate was a shift in initiative toward negotiation because cost accounting on the road could no longer be ignored. Civilian companies refused contracts without heavy escorts and high rates. Departments logged escorts lost animals and days when wood trains did not move. Within the Alliance, councils counted successful decoys, seized teams, and the absence of any need to batter stockade walls. By early spring, both sides knew where the leverage lay the forts could endure, but they could not open the corridor. The Alliance could keep families near river timber and food while keeping the road under threat. At Fort Laramie in 1868, the policy path acknowledged the battlefield ledger. Commissioners and tribal leaders drew up terms that translated facts into law. The critical clause was an admission against interest by the United States, stated plainly and enforceable. Treaty Commissioners Treaty Text, Fort Laramie, April 1868. The United States agrees to withdraw the military posts now established at Fort Phil Kearny and Fort C.F. Smith, and that the road leading thereto shall be discontinued. With signature and ratification initiative shifted fully. The enforcement sequence was immediate on the ground. Storehouses fired, stock removed, and the garrisons marched out. Within days to weeks, Alliance camps entered the empty posts to salvage timbers and iron. The Bozeman corridor ceased to function. That outcome was not a symbolic victory. It removed the daily pretext for escorts, wood trains, and herd guards, and it returned the basin's rhythms, grasswater bison, to the people who relied on them. Logistics stress explains why the turn came when it did. Ammunition reserves inside the fort stayed adequate because officers conserved fire and used compact perimeters, but fodder and fuel were relentless drains. A fort without hay could not keep horses. A fort without wood in winter could not keep men healthy. Every wagon of wood demanded an escort. Every escort demanded animals and rations. Every mile exposed soft targets. Meanwhile, Alliance logistics were embedded. Villages shifted along Powder River and Tongue River to shelter and timber. Food came from bison herds in the basin rather than from distant depots. When a strike group returned after a dawn rush on mule strings, the cost to the garrison multiplied across the next month of crippled movement. Human cost framed the turn. Names echo through reports and winter counts. Captain William Fetterman and Lieutenant George Grumman fell with their men beyond Lodge Trail Ridge in December 1866. Northern Arapaho families who lost lodges and food when Connor struck on 29 August 1865 rebuilt through hard winters. Lakota winter counts marked the year soldiers died beyond the ridge and the year when defenders in wagon boxes held against repeated rushes entries that record both pride and loss. Displacement paths spooled out from burned camps along Tongue River and from abandoned fort towns that had supplied the trail. Surgeons noted frostbite, malnutrition, and disease in post returns. Elders remembered the stress of winter flight and the danger of horse theft raids at dawn. The treaty's language fixed the decisive effect, but its cause lay in the structural forces set out earlier. Terrain favored ambush and concealment, not linear control. The Alliance's political cohesion allowed councils to enforce a patient strategy that blended harassment with set-piece traps. Logistics placed the United States on a thread of wagons and mules, while the Alliance drew food and fuel from the very ground in dispute. Technology mattered at the margins. Breech loaders saved lives in the lagers, but could not conjure a reliable road across a bowl of broken ridges without telegraph-dense cavalry screens and nearby depots. A brief evidence-based counterfactual clarifies the mechanics. Had a telegraph line and a chain of cavalry posts been emplaced at 10 to 15-mile intervals along the corridor with rail-supported depots pushing forward from the new Union Pacific reaction times, and forage supply might have narrowed the Alliance's window for decoys and herd strikes. Conversely, had the alliance shifted from harassment to full-scale assaults on stockades, to force dramatic capitulations, casualties would likely have spiked without changing the corridor's daily logic, and the treaty terms might have been harsher, not better. In both scenarios, the limiting factor remains logistics without dense nodes of supply and instant communication. A road through the Powder River Basin in the 1860s was intrinsically brittle. The turn therefore synthesizes back to the deep causes identified in the buildup. Gold and traffic created the road. Policy ambiguities split war and interior responses. The fort chain tried to project control across spaces that could only be watched, not held, and every mile of escort proved the cost of ignoring terrain and supply. The treaty did not invent a new reality. It ratified one. For a defined span, 1864 through 1868, the alliance set the terms of movement in the basin. The withdrawal of United States posts and the closure of the Bozeman route were the legal form of that fact. The legal consequence of the 1868 treaty fell first. The Bozeman Road closed. Fort Reno, Fort Phil Kearny, and Fort C.F. Smith were abandoned and burned. The Powder River country stood on paper as unceded Indian territory. Agency administration shifted almost at once. Red Cloud's followers drew rations at the new Red Cloud Agency on the North Platte. That site moved twice before settling on White Clay Creek and then transferring to the Missouri River agencies as Pine Ridge and Rosebud. Cheyenne River and Standing Rock received other Lakota circles. Northern Cheyenne moved between the Platte agencies and the Tongue River country before a permanent reservation was set in Montana. Northern Arapaho accepted rations on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. These placements appear in the annual report of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for 1869 and 1871, and in later agency returns that tracked annuity issues and ration schedules. The treaty text printed with Senate ratification in 1869 remained the formal reference for the road's closure and the guarantee that the Powder River Basin would not host a federal corridor. Policy did not remain stable. In 1874, a reconnaissance into the Black Hills under George Custer reported payable gold. Traffic rose from the Missouri River side rather than along the old Bozeman line. In 1876, war returned along Rosebud Creek and the Little Bighorn. Those fights did not reopen the Bozeman corridor, but they narrowed treaty space. In 1877, Congress attached an agreement to appropriations that compelled Lakota leaders to cede claims to the Black Hills. Administrative records for that act and the subsequent relocation of agencies note the reduction of the hunting domain that had framed the earlier Powder River victories. The report of the Board of Indian Commissioners for 1877 and the Commissioner of Indian Affairs report for 1878 list the boundary changes and the reduced hunting privileges off reservation. Law and administration moved next into schools and allotment. By 1879, federal boarding schools began to draw children from Lakota Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho families. Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania enrolled the first Lakota students that fall. Agency day schools followed on Pine Ridge, Rosebud, and Cheyenne River. School enrollment and discipline statistics appear in the annual reports of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for the early 1880s and in Carlisle's student registers. In 1887, the General Allotment Act authorized the division of many reservation lands into individual parcels and the opening of declared surplus land to non-native entry. Not all of the lands named here were allotted at once, and Northern Cheyenne secured fee title in a different sequence, but the statute changed the legal fabric of reservation landholding. Department of the Interior circulars on allotment and the Indian Office annual tables show the pace of surveys patents and the acreage left in common. Land and resource regimes in the Powder River region turned to leases and rails outside reservation lines. After the Bozeman route ended, shippers favored the Union Pacific to railheads in southern Wyoming and the new Northern Pacific line across Montana in the early 1880s. Spurs and stage roads connected ranching districts on the Tongue and Powder. Grazing leases and unlawful pasturage began to press the old hunting grounds. The General Land Office plats for the Tongue River and Powder River townships show the spread of ranch claims. The annual report of the Commissioner of the General Land Office in the late 1870s and early 1880s lists cattle outfits and filings near the old roadbed. Mineral leases followed in the 20th century, with coal development along the Powder Tract and state mining reports. None of these lines reproduced the Bozeman Trail's course or purpose, yet each narrowed practical access for off-reservation hunting and seasonal movement. Demography and health shifted under ration dependence and disease. Agency censuses on Pine Ridge and Rosebud in the early 1870s recorded sharp changes in age structure after the wars. Northern Cheyenne returns show movements between agencies before the Montana Reservation stabilized in the 1880s. The Wind River rolls show northern Arapaho families consolidating near the agency sawmill and fields. Physicians' reports in the Indian Affairs volumes recorded epidemics of measles and whooping cough in 1879 and smallpox scares in the early 1880s. Birth and mortality tables are incomplete, yet they show winter spikes that followed years of forced movement and poor rations. These patterns sit beside Army medical returns from Platte and Missouri River posts that noted the same outbreaks moving along freight lines and stage stops. Cultural continuance adapted to new boundaries. Ceremony did not stop because a road closed or a fort fell. It shifted in location and schedule. Sun dances and giveaways were moved or suppressed under rotating agency rules. Language persisted in households even as boarding schools punished its use. Seasonal movements persisted within reservation limits. Winter hunts turned into shorter trips under passes. The record is both administrative and indigenous. Winter counts by Lakota historians mark the year of the soldiers dying beyond the ridge, and the later years when people were gathered to agencies. Ledger art from Northern Cheyenne and Lakota artists shows forts, wagons, decoy parties, and agency scenes side by side. Collections at the Smithsonian and in state historical societies preserve these works with accession records that identify artists and dates. Agency correspondence on dance, permits filed with the commissioner in the 1880s and 1890s captures the regulatory pressure and the persistence of ceremony. Memory of the Powder River decade set into places on the land. Wyoming established Fort Kearny as a historic site in the 20th century. State markers trace the Bozeman Trail. The Fetterman battlefield and the Wagon Box fight grounds hold annual commemorations and educational programs that invite Lakota Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho participation. Program descriptions in state park brochures and minutes from site advisory boards cite the treaty clauses and the sequence of abandonment. Community events at Pine Ridge, Lame Deer, and Wind River fold the story into veterans' rides, language days, and youth horse programs. Tribal newspapers and program reports document buffalo herd restorations that link present ecology to the logistics that once sustained village life within the basin. The present-day names stand in ASCII: Oglala Lakota on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, Miniconjou Lakota on Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, Brule Lakota on Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, Hunkpapa Lakota on Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota and South Dakota, Northern Cheyenne on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana with the agency at Lame Deer, Northern Arapaho on Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. Each nation maintains cultural and legal programs that speak to the Powder River story. Language revitalization programs at Pine Ridge and Northern Cheyenne publish curricula and teacher training schedules. The Intertribal Buffalo Council lists member herd projects that include these nations and connects restoration to food sovereignty. Tribal Historic Preservation Offices publish consultation notices that cite the 1868 Treaty and Cultural Resource Surveys. Federal court filings in reserve rights cases reference the treaty text and subsequent statutes when asserting hunting or consultation rights off-reservation. The administrative trail for these outcomes is extensive. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, printed with Senate ratification, set the legal condition for closing the Bozeman Corridor. The annual reports of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for 1869 through 1872 recorded agency placements, ration issues, and early school statistics. The Board of Indian Commissioners reports for the mid-1870s tracked the reduction of hunting space after the Black Hills seizure. The General Land Office annual reports and township plats documented the advance of ranch filings into the Tongue and Powder districts. The General Allotment Act of 1887 and interior circulars recorded allotment procedures and their effects. The Carlisle School Registers and Indian Affairs education tables detailed student removals and returns. State historic site brochures and advisory minutes documented how the story is taught on the ground today. The continuance of culture and the narrowing of space run in parallel threads. The Powder River victory closed a road and removed 3 posts. That result flowed from alliance strategy terrain advantage and a logistics balance that favored villages within the basin over forts fed from far depots. The later decades pressed back through statutes, rails, and leases. Yet the institutions built since language nests, buffalo herds, veterans rides, and historic site partnerships carry forward the same lesson from the 1860s. Control of movement, food, and story decides who sets terms on the land. The records that bracket this arc remain accessible and precise. They are the treaty text for 1868, the Indian Affairs annual reports across the next decade, the allotment circulars after 1887, the school registers beginning in 1879, the General Land Office plats, and the state site minutes. Each shows how decisions taken on Powder River country fixed law memory and continuance long after the last escort left the road. Scholarly consensus rests on 3 points. First, the Lakota alliance with Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho translated terrain knowledge and political cohesion into operational control of the Powder River Basin between 1864 and 1868. Second, United States forts and escorts could not convert static garrisons into corridor security, because logistics distance and the absence of telegraph and dense cavalry screens fixed slow reaction times. Third, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 codified battlefield facts by closing the Bozeman corridor and withdrawing the forts, a rare case in which a native coalition secured strategic aims through a combination of harassment, set-piece ambush, and disciplined avoidance of costly assaults on walls. Contested points remain. Casualty numbers for Alliance fighters at Lodge Trail Ridge vary widely in Army reports and later syntheses. Ranges run from dozens to upward of 100, and no single tally is definitive. The weight of individual roles divides interpreters. Some credit Red Cloud's diplomacy and council discipline as decisive. Others foreground Crazy Horse's field leadership in decoy operations and timing. The weapon mix at the Wagon Box and Hayfield defenses is debated. Some accounts emphasize Springfield Allen conversions in soldiers' hands. Others note Henry rifles among